Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're doing something a little different.
Oh,
Instead of diving into a stack of articles or research papers, we're going to explore a single word, lenient,
okay.
through a series of fascinating open-ended questions.
These questions are designed to spark conversation and insights about understanding forgiveness and empathy
Really get us thinking.
without ever explicitly mentioning the word lenient itself.
So buckle up.
All right.
We're going to examine how we extend trust, navigate expectations,
Ooh, interesting.
and deal with situations that challenge our notions of fairness and understanding.
You might be surprised at the depth of these seemingly simple questions. They touch on fundamental aspects of human interaction
Hey, bet.
and how we perceive the world around us.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our first question asks, what does it mean to give someone the benefit of the doubt, and when should we extend that?
That's a good one.
It seems like a simple question,
Right.
but I have a feeling it goes much deeper than it appears.
Absolutely. Our source makes a fascinating comparison. Liking trust to a currency.
Okay?
You wouldn't just hand out money to anyone, would you?
True.
You invest it carefully, considering its value and potential return.
So you're saying we should be just as discerning when it comes to giving our trust?
Precisely. Trust is precious,
Yeah.
and it should be earned. It's about making a calculated decision based on someone's past actions, their character, and the specific situation.
That makes me think about the times I've placed my trust in someone who didn't deserve it. It's like making a bad investment. You
Right.
end up feeling burned and less likely to trust again.
It's natural to feel hesitant after a negative experience, but that's where the concept of leniency comes in. It's about recognizing that everyone makes mistakes, and that sometimes giving someone a second chance can be more rewarding than holding on to that hurt.
So how do we balance that need for discernment
Right.
with the potential benefits of being lenient?
Yeah.
How do we know when to give someone another shot?
That's where things get interesting. The source suggests we consider the severity of the transgression. Were they simply careless, or were their actions intentionally harmful? Was it an isolated incident, or is there a pattern of behavior?
I see. So it's about understanding the context
Exactly.
and making a judgment call based on the specific situation.
Yeah,
It's not about blindly trusting everyone or holding grudges forever.
exactly. It's about finding that middle ground where
Yeah.
we acknowledge the potential for harm while also recognizing the possibility for growth and redemption.
This whole discussion about trust makes me think about how we handle situations where people don't meet our expectations. Our next question dives into this, asking, how do you handle situations where someone doesn't meet your expectations?
It's a question that resonates with all of us.
Oh, yeah.
Because we've all experienced that disappointment, that feeling of betrayal when someone falls short.
I know I have. It can be especially difficult when it's someone close to us, someone we've placed a lot of trust and faith in.
The source emphasizes the importance of understanding the different roles people play in our lives. Our expectations for a close friend are naturally different from those we hold for a casual acquaintance.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like we have these unspoken contracts in our relationships
Right.
outlining what we expect from each other. And when those contracts are breached, it can feel like a violation of trust.
Exactly. But here's where leniency comes in again. Instead of immediately jumping to anger or resentment, the source suggests a sort of flagging system.
A flagging system, what does that mean?
It's about taking a step back and trying to understand the why behind their actions.
Okay.
Were there unforeseen circumstances? Did they misinterpret our expectations? Or was it a genuine lapse in judgment?
So it's about digging deeper, getting to the root of the issue before reacting. It's about giving them the space to explain themselves to show us whether they deserve that leniency.
Precisely.
Yeah.
It's about creating that space for open communication and understanding, rather than letting our initial emotions dictate our response.
I can already see how this shift in perspective can lead to more productive conversations and stronger relationships. But I'm also curious, can being too forgiving ever be a disadvantage? Our next question gets right to the heart of this, asking, can being too forgiving ever be a disadvantage, or is it always a virtue?
Now that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
We often hear that forgiveness is always the best path, but the source offers a slightly different perspective.
So you're saying there's a potential downside to being too lenient, too quick to forgive?
It's not so much about being quick to forgive, but rather about understanding the potential consequences of forgiving without consequences.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this perspective.
Okay.
What are these potential downsides?
Well, think about it. If someone repeatedly hurts us or betrays our trust,
Hmm.
and we continuously forgive them without addressing the issue, what message are we sending?
I guess we're essentially saying that their actions are acceptable, that there's no need for them to change their behavior.
Exactly. And that's where leniency can become a disadvantage.
Right.
It can create a cycle of hurt and resentment where we continuously get hurt while the other person faces no real consequences for their actions.
So it's not about holding on to anger or seeking revenge, but rather about setting healthy boundaries and
Yes.
making sure that forgiveness doesn't come at the expense of our own well-being.
Precisely. It's about finding that balance between understanding and accountability,
Hmm.
between extending grace and protecting ourselves.
This whole conversation about forgiveness makes me wonder, how can we tell the difference between someone who genuinely deserves another chance and someone who might take advantage of our leniency?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. But our source offers a fascinating analogy
Hmm.
that might help shed some light on this dilemma. They compare unforgivable actions to a computer virus.
Okay, I'm definitely curious to hear more about this analogy. It sounds a bit intense.
Well, think about how we deal with a computer virus. We don't necessarily try to erase all traces of it.
Right.
Instead, we use an antivirus program to quarantine it, to contain the threat and prevent it from causing further damage.
So you're saying we can apply a similar approach to those who've hurt us deeply.
Right.
We don't have to forget what happened, but we can choose to protect ourselves from further harm.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging the pain they caused, while also recognizing that constantly reliving those negative experiences can be incredibly draining. It's about choosing to move forward in a way that prioritizes our own well-being.
That makes me think about the saying, forgive but don't forget.
Mm.
It's not about condoning their actions, but rather about finding a way to release that anger and resentment so we can move on with our lives.
Precisely. And sometimes that might mean creating distance from those who've hurt us, setting boundaries to protect ourselves from further harm.
This whole conversation about forgiveness and second chances
Yeah.
is making me realize how complex these emotions can be.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
not always black and white.
Absolutely. And that's where self-awareness comes in. It's about understanding our own emotional triggers, our own capacity for forgiveness,
Hmm.
and recognizing that what feels right for one person might not feel right for another.
It's almost like we need to develop our own personal leniency compass,
Mm.
guiding us through these tricky situations
Mhm.
and helping us determine the best course of action.
I love that analogy. And just like a compass, our leniency compass might need recalibration from time to time as we
Mhm.
learn and grow from our experiences.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about in terms of my own approach to forgiveness and second chances.
Mm.
But I also want to explore the other side of the coin.
Okay.
What about those who are overly strict?
Right.
Those who seem to hold on to grudges with an iron grip?
That's a great point. Our source suggests that extreme behaviors, whether it's excessive leniency or unwavering strictness, often stem from personal insecurities.
You mean like those who are overly strict might be compensating for something they feel they lack?
Exactly. They might be projecting their own fears or anxieties onto others, using control and judgment as a way to feel more secure.
That's an interesting perspective. It's like they're using strictness as a shield to protect themselves from vulnerability.
And on the flip side, those who are overly lenient, always quick to forgive or make excuses for others, might be seeking validation or trying to avoid conflict.
So it's like they're using leniency as a way to people pleaser to avoid rocking the boat.
Precisely. And in both cases, those extreme behaviors can be detrimental to healthy relationships. It's all about finding that balance, that middle ground where we can be both compassionate and assertive, understanding and firm.
It makes me think about the different parenting styles we see.
Mm-hmm.
Some parents are incredibly strict while others are more permissive.
Right?
It seems like finding that middle ground, that balance between structure and freedom,
Yeah.
is key to raising well-adjusted children.
Absolutely. And it's not just about parenting, it's about all of our relationships. It's about learning to communicate our needs clearly while also respecting the needs of others.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to leniency.
Speaking of different approaches, I'm curious to explore how cultural differences might influence our perceptions of what's considered fair or understanding.
Okay.
Our final question delves into this, asking, how do cultural differences shape what we see as fair or understanding?
That's a crucial question,
Yeah.
especially in our increasingly interconnected world. Our source highlights how our cultural backgrounds, our upbringing, and our lived experiences shape our values and beliefs, including our understanding of leniency.
They make a point about how Economic disparities between countries can lead to vastly different mindsets about success, survival, and even what's considered ethical behavior.
Right. What might be seen as a minor transgression in one culture might be considered a major offense in another.
Oh, wow.
And these differing perspectives can often lead to misunderstandings and conflicts.
It makes you realize that there's no universal definition of fairness or leniency. It's a fluid concept that's constantly being shaped by our cultural lens.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to be aware of these cultural nuances, to approach interactions with curiosity and a willingness to learn from others, even if their views differ from our own.
It all ties back to the concept of empathy, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Being able to step into someone else's shoes and understand their perspective, even if we don't agree with it.
And that empathy can be a powerful tool for bridging cultural divides,
Yeah.
for finding common ground, and for extending leniency in a way that's both meaningful and respectful.
This whole conversation has been such a mind-bending exploration. We've gone from trust and forgiveness to cultural differences and the psychology behind extreme behaviors.
It really has.
And it all circles back to that core idea of leniency, how we choose to approach situations that challenge our notions of fairness and understanding.
It's amazing how much depth we can uncover from just a few simple questions.
I know, right?
And it all boils down to this. How do we navigate those gray areas of life,
Yeah.
those situations that require us to balance our own needs with the needs of others?
And how do we do that in a way that's both compassionate and authentic without compromising our own values or well-being?
That's the ongoing journey, isn't it?
I guess so.
And it's a journey worth taking, because ultimately practicing leniency in its truest form can lead to more fulfilling relationships, a greater sense of peace, and a deeper connection with the world around us.
I couldn't agree more. And on that note, we've got one final thought to leave you with before we wrap up this deep dive into the heart of leniency.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about extending leniency to others,
Mm-hmm.
but what about ourselves? Do you think we often hold ourselves to a different standard?
That's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
I think there's a tendency to be our own harshest critics.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We often replay past mistakes, dwell on perceived failures,
Right.
and struggle to offer ourselves the same grace we might extend to others.
You know, it's funny you say that. I was just thinking about how quick I am to judge myself for not living up to my own expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Yet I can be quite forgiving when others let me down.
It's a common pattern.
Right.
We often internalize societal messages about perfectionism and achievement,
Right.
creating these impossibly high standards for ourselves. And when we inevitably fall short, we tend to be much tougher on ourselves than we would ever be on a friend or loved one.
So how do we break free from that cycle of self-judgment?
Yeah, that's the question.
How do we cultivate more self-leniency?
I think it starts with awareness, recognizing those negative self-talk patterns, those moments when we're being overly critical or holding ourselves to an unrealistic standard,
Okay.
and then challenging those thoughts.
So it's like treating ourselves with the same compassion and understanding we would offer a friend who's going through a tough time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Asking ourselves, would I say these things to a friend? Would I judge them so harshly?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is no, then why are we doing it to ourselves?
I love that. It's like giving ourselves permission to be human, to make mistakes,
Mm-hmm.
to learn and grow without the constant weight of self-condemnation.
And that's where true leniency comes in, both towards ourselves and others. It's about recognizing that we're all works in progress, that we all have our flaws and imperfections.
For sure.
And that's okay.
It's about embracing that imperfection, that messy humanity, and choosing to approach ourselves and others with kindness, understanding, and a willingness to forgive.
Beautifully said.
Thanks.
And I think that's the perfect note to end on. Because ultimately, practicing leniency, both towards ourselves and others, is a journey, not a destination. It's a constant evolution, a commitment to showing up with grace and compassion, even when it's difficult.
I couldn't agree more. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the heart of leniency, remember this. Be kind to yourself, be understanding of others, and always strive to approach life's challenges with a spirit of openness and a willingness to forgive.
Because in the end, leniency is not about weakness. It's about strength. It's about choosing love over judgment, grace over perfection, and connection over isolation.
And that's a choice worth making every single day. Until next time, keep diving deep.